In the previous video, we configured the Zen delivery controller. So we installed the Zen software onto a Windows 2012 machine. It takes a little while. That process is now finished, so we can continue on with the configuration of that delivery controller. There's a few things that needs to happen first. The first thing I want to do is get my vCentre server ready to speak to my delivery controller. You know when you log on to your ESX client and often it'll pop up with a little bit of a license, not a license, sorry, a certificate warning. So it pops up and says, don't know the certificate, and most of us just hit ignore because it's a lab environment. We can't have that happening with the Citrix environment. It just won't work. So we need to import a certificate. And in order to make that work, there's a few steps. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a DNS entry for my vCentre in my Active Directory. So here I've called mine ntnx-vc-01.ntnx.local. That's just the naming convention in my lab. You can call yours whatever you'd like. And I'm going to create that entry in my Active Directory. So again, in my remote desktop connection manager, I've got a shortcut here to my domain controller. So I've RDP'd to it. I'll open up Server Manager. Let it have a bit of a think. I've got the DNS service running here. This is what we set up in my first video. And let's go down to DNS Manager. And this is where we can create DNS entries. So I've got a forward lookup zone configured. Here is my lab, and I've already created mine. ntnx-vc.01 goes to the IP address for my vCentre server. To create them, it's pretty easy. Just right mouse click, go new host, name, and the IP address if I wanted to. So if I hit add host, we're in business. You can also create a reverse lookup for that as well. So if you started with an IP address, it'll tell you the name, or forward, start with a name, it'll give you the IP address. So because I have that, that's the first thing I need to do. That means I can actually ping my server by name. Now Windows machines will automatically do this when you add them to the domain, but since I'm using a Linux-based appliance, it won't do that by itself. So that's all created. If you can do this test and ping your vCentre server, you're in business. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I need to actually make sure the vCentre knows that's what its host name is. So you can log into it. So just go to its IP address or its domain name now that you've got that set up on the original setup port. So that's 5480. 5480. Default is root and VMware. Log into that. I should have gone through here nice and cleanly beforehand. Remember where I'm putting it. I think it's under network. There it is, host name. So I've already configured mine, but it's super easy to set up. Just come into where it says address and make sure that name corresponds with what you've put into your DNS. If you have to change that, change it here, give it a new name, hit save, and then you want to come over to where it's got admin, the last tab, and click on this regenerate, certificate regeneration enabled. Okay, what this is going to do is when the system reboots, it's going to create a new certificate. So just to recap, you want to make sure you've got your host name configured like this, and if it hasn't been configured and it says something like localhost, you want to change that. You want to then set this admin to certificate regeneration enabled is yes, submit that, reboot the server, and it's going to create a new certificate that has this as the name, ntnx-vc-01.ntnxlocal. That's what I have in my lab. Your results will vary, but that's super important. Once that step's been done, we can go across to our delivery server and we're going to load up Internet Explorer. So load up IE. Let's ignore this for the moment. And we're going to go to that server. Oops. My shortcuts are getting a bit out of hand. And we're going to go to it on the secure port. You may have this come up. Actually, you will have this come up. This is just because the certificate that's installed on your vCentre isn't trusted. So if you've done things well, HTTPS and the host name, you'll get this. Just hit continue. And it'll just take a few seconds to load the appropriate page. with it, it's going to load the SSL certificate. So see how it says certificate error? That's what we want. Bit weird. Click on that. View certificates. Here's the certificate. Now, you want to make sure where it says issued to, it has your host name. That's super important. If that says localhost, if that has anything else other than what you've given it, and what's matched up here in the top bar, you need to go back to the beginning and make sure you've set your host name on your VMware server correctly, your VMware vCentre server correctly. So we're going to install the certificate. Now, the certificate needs to be installed to a pretty specific place. On a Windows 2012 R2 server, you're going to connect or add this certificate onto the local machine. We're going to place it in the Trusted People store. There's Trusted People. Hit OK. Next. Finished. Okay, I'll put that in the blog just so that way you can follow it. But there's a pretty straightforward process for different OSs. I'll put the instructions for 2008 R2 on my blog as well. Right, that's done. The next thing you want to do is find the Citrix Studio. So if you click on this little down arrow, you'll find Citrix Studio. I've already loaded it, so here it is. And we can start getting set up. This is pretty cool. 1, 2, 3 different steps. We're going to start with the site setup. Deliver applications and desktops to your users. Sounds good. Click on that. I find at times it's a little slow to load things, so a bit of patience here. Well, we want to create a fully configured production-ready site. Again, don't put this into production. We're breaking a few rules here. Site name. We're going to just use the default database. You can test that. That's fine if there's no database. We'll automatically create one. This is pretty easy. It's really good. Next, we're going to use a local licensing server that's been connected, and we're going to get a free 30-day trial, so you can play around with this. Hit next. Now, this is where you choose your hypervisor management tool. So I'm running VMware on here. But again, you know, you got VMM Manager, the Citrix capabilities for cloud platform, EC2 on Amazon. We're just going to stick with VMware vSphere for the moment. So click on that and take note of this connection address. So what it's got here is https://example.com/SDK. So in my environment, it's going to be https, the host name of my server. Here, I'll just go back and steal it from here. I can just paste it. Oops. And at the end of this, so https:// in my case, it's ntnx-vc-01 SDK. Excellent. I'm going to give it my credentials. Again, I'm just using the defaults, and I'm going to put here vCentre. This is just informational. And I'm going to use Studio Tools machine creation services. So what that's basically going to do is have vCentre do some of the heavy lifting for creating VMs. Hit next. If I have done the certificate importation correctly and my vCentre server name is correct and everything looks good, I will actually get to the next screen. If it pops up with a whole bunch of writing in red, go back. You've probably made a mistake importing the certificate, and that's a really common issue. So you want to just be patient here. Hopefully it moves to the next step. If it doesn't, chances are it's going to be a certificate problem. There we go. Happy days. That's connected through. Name for these resources. So this is my cluster name. And if I hit browse, this is coming straight off my vCentre server. So I'm going to add my VMs to this particular cluster. And here's my network. Remember, we don't do SVM iSCSI. That's the Nutanix's internal network. We're going to do VM network. Tick that box, hit next. Choose my data store. I'm going to pop them all on the first data store. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory as far as some different settings. I leave it all default. I'm not going to do any app V publishing. Leave that for a later lab and hit finished. So if you follow what I've suggested kind of word for word, then this should just work. the big key, the big thing to get right here is importing that certificate. If you don't get that right, it's just a world of pain. You're going to have a lot of problems. So I'm going to leave this for a little while. Again, this is one of those things that just takes a bit of time because it creates the database and the services. So just be patient. And once this is finished, you're pretty much ready to start getting your desktops up and running. So let's just give this a few minutes to finish. Once that's done, you can head to the second stage, doing machine catalogs. Now, I think it's probably a good idea at this point to start setting up the SOE. So what I'm going to do is break this video in two. The next video is going to focus on setting up a Windows 7 machine ready to roll, and then we're going to jump back to this second configuration stage.